The chandelier light sparkled over the crowd of New York's elite as Ethan Miller entered the grand ballroom of the prestigious LaFontaine Hotel. The 35-year-old billionaire carried himself with an air of confidence that bordered on arrogance. Dressed in a tailored black tuxedo, his piercing green eyes scanned the room, acknowledging nods and greetings from those eager to bask in his presence. Ethan wasn't just wealthy, he was powerful, charming, and used to getting everything he wanted. His reputation as a ruthless businessman and a serial heartbreaker preceded him. Make sure to subscribe to my channel so I can continue bringing you more fascinating true stories like this one. And don't forget to watch this video till the end, because this story is going to be incredibly interesting. Tonight's event was no different. Another gala filled with champagne, shallow conversations, and the who's who of society. Ethan's world was polished perfection, where every relationship was transactional, and emotions were a game he played better than most. But beneath the tailored suits and smug smile lay a man whose life, though extravagant, lacked depth. As he stood near the bar sipping a glass of his favorite single malt, a familiar voice interrupted his musings. "Ethan, enjoying the usual monotony?" Turning, Ethan smirked as he saw Victor Hayes, his closest friend and confidant. Or so he thought. Victor, a sharp-witted investment banker with a mischievous streak, was one of the few people who could match Ethan's confidence. "Monotony suits me," Ethan replied, raising his glass in a mock toast. "Besides, it's not like anyone here could surprise me." Victor chuckled, his eyes gleaming with mischief. "Oh, is that so? No one, not even me?" Ethan raised an eyebrow, intrigued. Victor's tone carried the weight of a challenge, and Ethan thrived on competition. "What are you getting at, Victor?" Leaning in conspiratorially, Victor lowered his voice, ensuring only Ethan could hear. "I have a proposition for you, something that might actually test those legendary charms of yours." Ethan's smirk widened. "Go on." Victor's grin grew as he glanced around the room, ensuring they weren't overheard. "You're always bragging about how you can win anyone over no matter the odds. How about this? Marry someone completely outside your type. Someone unconventional." Ethan laughed, though there was a sharpness in his tone. "Unconventional? You'll have to be more specific." Victor's gaze settled on a woman across the room. She stood apart from the crowd, her shoulders back, her head held high. Sophia Carter. She wasn't the typical guest at these events. Her figure was fuller, her attire simpler, yet she exuded a confidence that demanded respect. She wasn't someone who sought approval, she commanded it. Ethan followed Victor's line of sight and frowned slightly. "Her? You can't be serious." Victor smirked, sensing Ethan's discomfort. "Why not? Afraid you can't handle a real challenge?" Ethan straightened, his pride pricked. "And what's in it for me?" Victor raised his champagne glass with a triumphant smile. $1 million to the winner, if you can stay married for 6 months and get her to fall for you." The room seemed to hum with the weight of the bet. Ethan's confidence flickered for a moment, but his competitive spirit flared stronger. This wasn't just about money, it was about proving himself. He thrived on the impossible, and Victor's smirk only fueled his determination. 6 months? Ethan repeated, his voice steady. "Consider it done." Victor laughed, raising his glass again. "Good luck, my friend. You're going to need it." As the night went on, Ethan's gaze returned to Sophia, the woman who had unknowingly become the key to his next challenge. Little did he know this bet would unravel everything he thought he knew about himself, and leave him questioning the very foundation of his world. The game had begun, but the stakes were higher than Ethan could ever imagine. Ethan Miller's world was one of calculated perfection, where every moment was a performance for an audience that he both entertained and controlled. His mornings began with a meticulously planned schedule: early workouts with a personal trainer, business calls with overseas partners over breakfast, and an endless stream of high-stakes meetings that fueled his multi-million-dollar empire. From the moment he woke up in his penthouse overlooking Central Park, Ethan lived a life that screamed success. But beneath the surface of his carefully curated world was a man running on autopilot, navigating relationships and responsibilities with a detached indifference. At 35, Ethan was at the pinnacle of his career, celebrated in glossy magazines and envied by his peers. Yet his personal life told a different story. His relationships, if they could even be called that, were fleeting, shallow, and transactional. Women adored him for his charm and wealth, but none of them truly knew him. Ethan preferred it that way. To him, emotions were messy, unpredictable, and unnecessary. Control was what mattered, and he had mastered the art of keeping people at a distance. His inner circle was small and selective. Victor Hayes, the provocateur of the bet, was among his closest confidants. While their friendship was built on shared ambition and sharp wit, it wasn't without rivalry. Victor often pushed Ethan's boundaries, enjoying the rare moments when he could rattle his unshakable friend. Then there was Ella Miller, Ethan's younger sister. A sharp contrast to his personality. Ella worked as a public defender, championing the underprivileged and viewing Ethan's world of luxury with disdain. "You're wasting your potential," Ella often told him during their rare family dinners. "All this money and you've never done anything meaningful with it. What's the point of it all?" Ethan would brush her off with a smirk and a change of topic, but her words stayed with him longer than he cared to admit. That evening, as Ethan sipped his coffee and prepared for the next day, Victor's bet lingered in his mind. He thought about Sophia Carter, the woman who had been the subject of Victor's challenge. In truth, Ethan didn't know much about her. Only that she wasn't part of the glamorous world he inhabited. What little he did know intrigued him. Sophia was a community advocate, known for her strong opinions and unwavering confidence. She had a reputation for being direct, and she wasn't afraid to stand her ground, even against the wealthiest and most powerful. Unlike the women Ethan usually dated, Sophia wasn't someone who could be impressed by expensive dinners or designer gifts. She was the kind of woman who seemed immune to the superficial charms Ethan wielded so effortlessly. Why would she agree to something like this? Ethan muttered to himself as he flipped through his emails. He was accustomed to being in control, yet this time he felt an unfamiliar sense of uncertainty. The bet was supposed to be simple: marry her, stay married for 6 months, and walk away with his pride and a cool million. But the more he thought about Sophia, the more he realized this wouldn't be like any other challenge he had faced. Meanwhile, across the city, Sophia Carter was preparing for her own busy day. Unlike Ethan's life of luxury, Sophia's world revolved around purpose. She worked tirelessly for causes she believed in, often juggling multiple responsibilities with little rest. Her independence was her strength, and she wore it like armor. Sophia lived in a modest apartment in Brooklyn, far removed from Ethan's opulence. Her evenings were spent responding to emails from community members, planning fundraising events, and advocating for policy changes. She had little patience for people who wasted her time, and even less for those who tried to control her. That night, as Sophia thought about the unusual proposal she had accepted, she couldn't help but laugh at the absurdity of it all. Marrying a man like Ethan Miller was the last thing she had ever imagined doing, but she had her reasons. Reasons she hadn't shared with anyone, not even Ethan. Ethan, for all his wealth and charm, didn't intimidate her. She had faced far greater challenges in her life, and she wasn't about to let a rich, arrogant man think he could dictate the terms of her life. 6 months, she said quietly, staring at her reflection in the mirror. 6 months and then I'm done. As the days passed, Ethan found himself preparing for his first meeting with Sophia. He had carefully planned every detail, from the restaurant to his approach. Yet he couldn't shake the feeling that this encounter would be different. For the first time in a long time, Ethan wasn't sure what to expect. And for someone who thrived on control, that uncertainty was both exhilarating and unnerving. Ethan's world was about to collide with Sophia's, and neither of them realized just how much their lives were about to change. Ethan sat in his sleek black car, staring at the entrance of La Belle Vie, one of New York's most exclusive restaurants. He had arranged for this meeting to take place on neutral ground, a setting that oozed sophistication and wealth, a stage where he could remain in his comfort zone. The anticipation of the moment was palpable, and for once, Ethan felt a flicker of uncertainty. This wasn't a typical business negotiation or a casual date. This was the first step in a game that could either bolster his ego or humiliate him beyond repair. Inside the restaurant, everything was perfect. Crystal chandeliers cast warm light over the room, soft jazz music played in the background, and the air smelled faintly of fresh roses and expensive perfume. Ethan adjusted his cufflinks, glancing at the watch on his wrist. He wasn't used to waiting, but for reasons he couldn't explain, he didn't mind this time. When the door opened and Sophia Carter stepped inside, Ethan's gaze immediately locked on her. She was nothing like the women he typically encountered. Sophia's presence was striking, not because of her appearance, but because of her confidence. She walked into the room as if she owned it, her chin held high, her posture commanding respect. She wore a simple, elegant dress that contrasted sharply with the over-the-top ensembles of the restaurant's usual clientele. As she approached the table, Ethan stood to greet her, extending his hand. Sophia hesitated for a moment before shaking it, her grip firm and unyielding. "Ethan Miller, I presume," she said, her voice calm but carrying an edge that caught him off guard. "And you must be Sophia Carter," Ethan replied, flashing his signature smile. He gestured for her to sit, and as she did, she maintained eye contact, an unwavering gaze that made Ethan feel like he was being evaluated. The waiter arrived to take their orders, but Sophia waved him off politely. "We won't need much time. I prefer to get straight to the point." Ethan raised an eyebrow, intrigued. "Direct. I like that." Sophia leaned forward slightly, her expression unwavering. "Good. Then let's not waste each other's time. I know about the bet, Mr. Miller." Her words hit him like a cold splash of water. For the first time in years, Ethan felt a momentary loss of composure. "I see," he said, regaining his confident demeanor. "And yet you're here. Why?" Sophia's lips curved into a faint smile, but her eyes remained sharp. "Because I have my own reasons. Let's just say this arrangement could benefit me as much as it benefits you. But make no mistake, Ethan, this isn't about you charming your way through 6 months. If you think you can manipulate me, you're mistaken." Her bluntness took Ethan by surprise, but it also intrigued him. Most people bent to his charm, or at least feigned deference. Sophia, however, was different. She wasn't afraid of him, and that alone made her stand out. "Fair enough," Ethan replied, leaning back in his chair with a smirk. "But if we're going to do this, we might as well enjoy the ride." Sophia tilted her head, studying him. "I'm not interested in your money or your lifestyle. This is a business arrangement for me, nothing more. 6 months and then we go our separate ways." Ethan felt a pang of annoyance at her dismissive tone, but pushed it aside. This wasn't just a game anymore. It was a challenge, and he thrived on challenges. 6 months, he echoed, not a day more. The rest of the evening passed in tense, yet oddly stimulating conversation. Sophia held her ground on every topic, from ethics to economics, refusing to let Ethan dominate the discussion. By the end of the meal, Ethan found himself more intrigued than ever. Sophia wasn't just different. She was a force of nature, and for reasons he couldn't explain, he wanted to understand her. As they parted ways, Ethan watched Sophia walk out of the restaurant, her head held high. For the first time in a long time, he wasn't sure if he was the hunter or the prey. This wasn't just a bet anymore. It was the beginning of something far more complicated. And for the first time, Ethan wondered if he might have underestimated the stakes. The morning sun spilled through the tall glass windows of Ethan's penthouse, illuminating a world of luxury that most could only dream of. Ethan, however, barely noticed. He stood in his kitchen, sipping his usual black coffee, replaying the meeting with Sophia in his mind. Despite his confidence, the encounter had left him unsettled. Sophia Carter wasn't someone who could be impressed or controlled easily, and that intrigued him more than he cared to admit. The 6-month marriage had begun. Ethan, determined to make the arrangement work in his favor, devised a strategy. His plan was simple: charm Sophia, show her the kind of lifestyle she could only dream of, and watch as she inevitably softened to his world of opulence. But from the start, nothing went as expected. That first week, Ethan invited Sophia to an exclusive charity gala. The event was lavish, attended by New York's elite, and he assumed it would serve as the perfect introduction to his world. He spared no expense, arranging for a designer to fit Sophia with an exquisite gown and hiring a stylist to ensure every detail was perfect. Sophia, however, had other plans. When Ethan arrived at her modest Brooklyn apartment to pick her up, he was met with a surprise. Sophia stepped out wearing a simple, elegant black dress, not the designer gown he had arranged for her. Her hair was styled neatly, and she carried herself with the same confidence that had unnerved him during their first meeting. "You didn't like the dress I sent?" Ethan asked, keeping his tone neutral. "I appreciated the gesture," Sophia replied, her voice calm, "but I prefer to wear something that feels like me. I'm not here to play a role, Ethan. He bit back a retort, reminding himself that charm, not confrontation, was the key. Fair enough, he said with a smile. Shall we? The gala was everything Ethan had promised. Extravagant decor, high-profile guests, and the finest champagne. Yet as they moved through the crowd, it became clear that Sophia wasn't impressed. She engaged politely with the other guests, but remained detached, uninterested in their superficial conversations about wealth and status. At one point, a prominent socialite approached the couple, and with a forced smile, complimented Sophia's unique look. Sophia's response was measured but sharp. Thank you, she said. I suppose standing out in a room full of conformity does make one unique. Ethan stifled a laugh, watching as the socialite's smile faltered. For the first time that evening, he felt a flicker of admiration for Sophia. She wasn't intimidated by his world, and that made her unpredictable. As the days passed, Ethan began to realize that his usual tactics weren't working. He tried everything, gifting her expensive jewelry, taking her to exclusive restaurants, and even planning a weekend getaway to a private island. But Sophia remained steadfast, refusing to be dazzled by his wealth. I don't need these things, Ethan, she said one evening as he handed her a velvet box containing a diamond bracelet. I appreciate the thought, but I value experiences over possessions. Frustration began to build. For a man who was used to winning, Sophia's resistance felt like a personal challenge. Yet beneath the frustration there was something else: respect. Sophia wasn't playing by his rules, and that forced Ethan to rethink his approach. The first real clash came during a quiet evening at the penthouse. Ethan had arranged for a private chef to prepare dinner, hoping to create an atmosphere that would allow them to connect. As they sat at the table, the city lights twinkling behind them, the conversation turned to their differing views on life. You seem to think money solves everything, Sophia said, her tone even but firm. Doesn't it? Ethan replied, leaning back in his chair. Money gives you freedom, comfort, security. What else is there? Sophia shook her head, a small smile playing on her lips. Money gives you control, Ethan, but not everything worth having can be controlled. The word struck a nerve, though Ethan hit it well. Control was the foundation of his life, the thing that defined him. And here was Sophia, challenging that very belief with a quiet certainty that was impossible to ignore. By the end of the week, Ethan realized he was at a crossroads. His usual methods were failing, and Sophia's resilience only made him more determined. For the first time he found himself questioning not just how to win the bet, but why he cared so much. Sophia was unlike anyone he had ever met, and her refusal to conform to his expectations was forcing him to confront parts of himself he had long ignored. What had started as a game was quickly becoming something far more complex, and Ethan wasn't sure if he was ready for the challenges ahead. Ethan sat in his office, staring at the city skyline, trying to make sense of the whirlwind that had become his life. The bet had seemed simple in theory, but Sophia's independence and refusal to play along had thrown him off balance. He wasn't used to resistance, especially not from someone who was supposed to be part of his carefully crafted plan. It wasn't just her words that lingered in his mind, but the way she carried herself, with an unshakable confidence that made him question his usual approach. Meanwhile, Sophia was equally contemplative. Her life had been a series of calculated decisions, and agreeing to this marriage was no exception. She had her reasons she hadn't yet shared with Ethan, but that didn't mean she found the arrangement any less challenging. Ethan's constant attempts to impress her with material wealth were predictable and frankly exhausting. Yet she couldn't deny that there were moments when his sincerity seemed to shine through, even if he didn't realize it himself. That week, Ethan decided to shift his strategy. Instead of grand gestures, he focused on smaller, more personal actions. He offered to help Sophia with her community project, a local initiative aimed at providing resources for underprivileged families. Initially skeptical, Sophia agreed, thinking it would be a way to keep Ethan occupied and out of her way. To her surprise, Ethan showed genuine interest, attending meetings and even funding part of the project. While she appreciated his involvement, she remained cautious, unsure if this was another ploy to win her over. The collaboration wasn't without its challenges. At one point during a planning session, Ethan suggested hosting a fundraiser at his penthouse. Sophia, unimpressed by the idea, pushed back, emphasizing the importance of authenticity in their efforts. The disagreement quickly escalated into a heated exchange, with both refusing to back down. Yet as tensions flared, something unexpected happened. Ethan listened. For the first time, he set aside his pride and considered Sophia's perspective. They eventually reached a compromise, hosting the event at a local community center, a decision that earned Sophia's grudging respect. Despite their progress, Ethan's past habits were hard to shake. He couldn't help but feel frustrated by Sophia's constant resistance, even as he admired her determination. One evening, after a particularly long day, he tried to broach a more personal topic, hoping to bridge the gap between them. But Sophia, wary of his intentions, shut down the conversation, leaving Ethan feeling more distant than ever. It was clear that earning her trust would require more than fleeting acts of goodwill. Sophia, on the other hand, found herself grappling with conflicting emotions. While she respected Ethan's efforts, she couldn't ignore the nagging feeling that his actions were driven more by his ego than genuine change. Yet there were moments, fleeting but undeniable, when she saw glimpses of a man who was capable of more. These moments confused her, making it harder to maintain the emotional distance she had worked so hard to preserve. As the days passed, their dynamic grew increasingly complex. Ethan's persistence, coupled with his willingness to adapt, began to chip away at Sophia's defenses, even as she tried to hold her ground. Their interactions were a delicate dance, filled with unspoken tensions and moments of vulnerability that neither was fully prepared to confront. The game was changing, and both of them were starting to realize that the stakes were far higher than they had anticipated. Sophia's guarded demeanor had become a constant challenge for Ethan. He was used to people opening up to him, bending to his will, or at the very least pretending to agree with him. But Sophia was different. She wasn't afraid to call him out, to push back when she felt he was overstepping. This wasn't just frustrating, it was disarming. And for the first time, Ethan found himself wanting to understand someone rather than control them. While Ethan continued to adjust his approach, Sophia remained watchful. She was no stranger to people with ulterior motives, and she wasn't about to let her guard down. What Ethan didn't know, however, was that Sophia was playing her own game. She had agreed to the marriage not because of the bet, but for reasons deeply personal. Her life had been marked by struggles that Ethan couldn't begin to imagine, and she had learned long ago to navigate difficult situations with resilience and strategy. That week, Sophia revealed a part of herself that caught Ethan off guard. During one of their community project meetings, she mentioned her late father, a man she described as compassionate and hardworking, but ultimately broken by the weight of financial hardship. Ethan noticed the subtle shift in her tone, the way her usually composed expression softened when she spoke of him. It was a rare moment of vulnerability, one that left Ethan feeling both intrigued and unsettled. Later that evening, Ethan found himself reflecting on Sophia's words. He realized he knew almost nothing about her past, her family, or what had shaped her into the woman she was today. This lack of knowledge bothered him more than he expected. He was accustomed to being the one with all the information, the one who could predict people's moves before they made them. But with Sophia, he was constantly in the dark. Sophia, too, was struggling. She had spent years building a life defined by independence and self-reliance. Yet here she was, married to a man whose world was the antithesis of her own. The more time she spent with Ethan, the harder it became to ignore the cracks in his polished exterior. There were moments, fleeting but undeniable, when he seemed genuinely vulnerable, as if the mask he wore for the world was beginning to slip. These moments unsettled her, challenging the narrative she had constructed about him. The turning point came during a quiet dinner at the penthouse. They had agreed to spend the evening together, a rare occurrence given their busy schedules. Ethan, hoping to create a relaxed atmosphere, cooked a simple meal, something he hadn't done in years. Sophia was surprised by the gesture, though she didn't let it show. As they ate, the conversation turned to their respective childhoods. Ethan spoke briefly about his privileged upbringing, but it was clear he avoided delving too deeply into his past. Sophia, in contrast, shared stories of her childhood, painting a vivid picture of a life filled with both joy and hardship. Ethan listened intently, his usual arrogance replaced by genuine curiosity. At one point, Sophia mentioned a pivotal moment in her life, A time when her family's financial struggles nearly cost them their home. Her voice wavered slightly as she recounted how her father had worked tirelessly to keep their family afloat, only to face betrayal from someone he had trusted. Ethan couldn't ignore the parallels to his own business practices, the way he had prioritized success over ethics. The realization was like a punch to the gut. After dinner, as Sophia cleared the table, Ethan found himself blurting out a question that had been on his mind for weeks. "Why did you agree to this marriage?" Sophia paused her back to him before turning around with a calm but serious expression. "Why do you think?" Ethan hesitated, caught off guard by her directness. "I assumed it was personal gain," he admitted, though the words felt hollow even as he spoke them. Sophia's eyes narrowed slightly, and for a moment, Ethan thought she might walk away. Instead, she leaned against the counter and crossed her arms. Maybe it was, or maybe it was something more. Her cryptic response left Ethan more confused than ever. But one thing was clear. Sophia was playing her own game, and for the first time in his life, Ethan wasn't sure if he was winning. The revelation unsettled him, forcing him to confront the possibility that he had underestimated her. That night, as Sophia retreated to her room and Ethan sat alone in the penthouse's sprawling living room, he couldn't shake the feeling that this marriage was no longer about the bet. The stakes had shifted, and for reasons he couldn't yet articulate, Ethan found himself wanting something he had never wanted before: Sophia's respect. Ethan's frustration was mounting. Despite his wealth, charm, and calculated efforts, Sophia remained an enigma. Her defiance, her ability to stand firm in the face of his every move, was a constant reminder that she wasn't like anyone he had ever encountered. What had started as a simple bet was now unraveling into something far more complicated. Ethan wasn't used to feeling out of control, and it was eating at him. Sophia, on the other hand, was beginning to see the cracks in Ethan's polished exterior. For all his confidence and bravado, there were moments when he seemed lost, even vulnerable. She couldn't help but wonder what had driven him to become the man he was. A man so determined to win at all costs. But her empathy was tempered by caution. She had her own reasons for entering into this marriage, and she wasn't about to let Ethan distract her from her goals. Their tension reached a boiling point during an afternoon charity event. The two had been working together on a fundraiser for Sophia's community project, but their differing approaches to nearly everything had made the process exhausting. Ethan insisted on lavish decor and high-profile attendees, while Sophia pushed for simplicity and authenticity. "You're missing the point," Sophia said sharply as they stood in the middle of the event space, surrounded by bustling volunteers. "This isn't about impressing people. It's about making a real impact. And you think keeping things small and modest is going to do that?" Ethan shot back, his frustration evident. "People donate when they're impressed. That's how the world works." Sophia crossed her arms, her expression steely. "Maybe that's how your world works, Ethan, but not mine." Their argument drew the attention of the nearby volunteers, who quickly averted their gazes and pretended to focus on their tasks. The tension between Ethan and Sophia was palpable, and for a moment, neither of them spoke. Then, without another word, Sophia turned and walked away, leaving Ethan standing there, fuming. That evening, back at the penthouse, the silence between them was deafening. Ethan paced the living room, replaying the argument in his mind. He hated how Sophia made him feel, like a child who didn't understand the world beyond his bubble of privilege. But more than that, he hated that she might be right. Finally, unable to stand the silence any longer, Ethan knocked on Sophia's door. When she opened it, her expression was guarded but calm. "We need to talk," he said, his tone softer than before. Sophia hesitated before stepping aside to let him in. Ethan entered the room and stood near the window, looking out at the city lights. For a moment he didn't say anything, as if searching for the right words. "I don't understand you," he finally admitted, turning to face her. "You don't care about the things that matter to most people. Money, power, status. They mean nothing to you. Why?" Sophia met his gaze, her expression unreadable. "Because I've seen what happens when people chase those things. Destroys them. It destroys their families, their relationships, their humanity." Her words hit Ethan harder than he expected. He thought about his own life, the sacrifices he had made, the relationships he had pushed aside, all in pursuit of success. Was she right? Had he lost his humanity along the way? "I didn't choose this life," Ethan said, his voice quieter now. Chose me. I was expected to succeed, to win no matter the cost. And I did. But now I don't know. Sophia studied him for a long moment, her expression softening slightly. You're not the first person to feel trapped by their own choices, Ethan. But the question is, what are you going to do about it? The question lingered in the air, heavy with meaning. For the first time, Ethan felt the weight of his own emptiness. The realization that his life of luxury had left him unfulfilled. But alongside that emptiness was something else. A flicker of hope, a desire to change. As he left Sophia's room that night, Ethan knew one thing for certain. This wasn't just about winning the bet anymore. It was about proving to Sophia, to himself, that he could be someone worth knowing, someone capable of more than shallow victories. But earning her respect, let alone her trust, would require more than words. It would require a transformation he wasn't sure he was ready for. The days that followed were tense, but beneath the surface, something was beginning to shift. Ethan's frustration with Sophia was now accompanied by a growing curiosity. Her words lingered in his mind, challenging him in ways he had never experienced before. For the first time, he began to question not just his approach to the bet, but the very foundation of his life. Meanwhile, Sophia maintained her distance, observing Ethan with a mix of skepticism and intrigue. She had seen glimpses of vulnerability in him, but she wasn't ready to trust those moments just yet. It was during a quiet evening at the penthouse that everything changed. Sophia had spent the day finalizing plans for a major milestone in her community project, a public awareness campaign focused on housing rights. Ethan had offered to help, but Sophia, wary of his motives, had declined. When she returned home, she was surprised to find him in the living room, surrounded by stacks of research materials and a whiteboard covered in notes. "What is all this?" she asked, her tone cautious. Ethan looked up, his expression serious. "I know you didn't want my help, but I thought I'd dig into some of the issues you're working on. I wanted to understand what you're fighting for." Sophia raised an eyebrow, unsure whether to be impressed or suspicious. "And why would you care?" Ethan sighed, setting down the notebook in his hand. "Because I realized something. You're the first person I've met in years who actually believes in something bigger than themselves. And maybe I want to believe in something too." Sophia wasn't sure how to respond. Part of her wanted to dismiss his words as another attempt to win her over. But another part, a quieter, more hopeful part, wondered if he was being sincere. She decided to test him. "If you really want to help," she said, crossing her arms, "you can join me tomorrow at the campaign launch. But this isn't about money or connections, Ethan. It's about being present, about showing up for something that matters." Ethan nodded without hesitation. "I'll be there." The next day, Sophia was surprised to find Ethan waiting for her outside the campaign venue. He was dressed simply, in stark contrast to his usual tailored suits. And he carried an air of determination that seemed out of place for the man she thought she knew. Together, they entered the crowded community center, where volunteers buzzed with last-minute preparations. Throughout the day, Ethan followed Sophia's lead, assisting wherever he could and engaging with the people involved. It was a world far removed from the glitz and glamour of his usual circles. And for the first time, Ethan felt a sense of purpose that wasn't tied to his wealth or status. He listened to stories from families struggling with housing insecurity, their resilience and hope leaving a profound impact on him. At one point, Sophia caught Ethan speaking with an elderly woman who had been evicted from her home after decades of living there. He listened intently, asking questions and offering words of support. Sophia couldn't help but feel a flicker of admiration. For all his faults, Ethan was showing a side of himself she hadn't expected, a side that seemed genuine. By the end of the day, as they packed up and prepared to leave, Sophia turned to Ethan with a curious expression. "Why did you really come today?" she asked. Ethan hesitated, then met her gaze. "Because I needed to see what it's like to care about something real. And because I wanted to understand you." Sophia's heart softened slightly at his words, but she didn't let it show. "Understanding me isn't the same as earning my trust, Ethan. That takes time." "I know," he replied, his voice steady, "but I'm willing to try." That night, as they walked back to the car, the air between them felt lighter. For the first time, there was no tension, no underlying clash of wills. Instead, there was a sense of possibility, A small but significant step towards something neither of them fully understood yet. What Ethan didn't realize, however, was that the day's events had planted a seed of doubt in Sophia's mind. She had been so sure of who Ethan was, so certain that he couldn't change, but now she wasn't so sure. And that uncertainty scared her more than she cared to admit. Sophia sat alone in her room that evening, staring out the window at the city lights. The day had been a whirlwind. Her campaign launch had gone better than expected, and the community response had been overwhelmingly positive. But what lingered in her mind wasn't the success of the event. It was Ethan, his presence, his willingness to engage, and the sincerity in his eyes as he listened to people's stories. It all felt unexpected, almost unsettling. She had walked into this marriage with clear expectations. Ethan Miller, the arrogant millionaire, was supposed to be a man of shallow ambitions and selfish motives, and for the most part he had lived up to that image. But today she had seen something different, something she hadn't anticipated. A part of her wanted to believe it was real, but another part warned her to remain cautious. People like Ethan didn't change overnight. In the penthouse's living room, Ethan was similarly lost in thought. The stories he had heard at the campaign launch replayed in his mind, each one a stark reminder of how far removed his life had been from the struggles of ordinary people. He had built his empire on ruthless ambition, prioritizing profit over people, and until now he had never questioned the cost. But today had shaken him. The gratitude and resilience he had witnessed had stirred something in him, a longing for purpose he hadn't felt in years. As he sipped his drink, Ethan replayed his conversation with an elderly woman from the campaign. She had spoken about losing her home, about the betrayal of the system she had trusted. Ethan had seen the pain in her eyes, a pain that reminded him of Sophia's quiet determination. For the first time he realized that his decisions, his way of living, might have caused harm he had never considered. The following morning Sophia found Ethan in the kitchen, already awake and reading through a stack of documents. He looked up as she entered, his expression unusually serious. "What's all this?" she asked, pouring herself a cup of coffee. "I started looking into some of the businesses I've worked with over the years," Ethan said, his voice calm but resolute. "I've been thinking about how many people I might have hurt along the way. I want to make things right." Sophia arched an eyebrow, unsure whether to be impressed or skeptical. "And how exactly do you plan to do that?" "I don't know yet," Ethan admitted, setting the papers aside. "But yesterday made me realize that I've been so focused on winning that I never stopped to think about the cost. Meeting those people, hearing their stories, it put things into perspective." Sophia studied him, searching for any hint of insincerity. But for once she couldn't find it. "It's not enough to feel guilty, Ethan. If you want to change, you have to take action. And it's not going to be easy." "I know," he said, meeting her gaze. "But I'm willing to try, not for the bet, not for anyone else, just for myself." The vulnerability in his voice caught Sophia off guard. She had always viewed Ethan as a man of unshakable confidence, someone who thrived on control. But now he seemed human, and that realization unnerved her more than anything. As the day went on, Sophia found herself watching Ethan more closely. He had always been meticulous in his actions, but now there was a sincerity to his efforts that she couldn't ignore. He joined her at another community meeting, quietly listening and offering support where he could. He didn't try to dominate the conversation or impose his ideas. Instead, he followed Sophia's lead, showing a humility that felt strangely out of character. By the end of the day, Sophia's resolve was beginning to waver. She had entered this marriage with a plan, certain that Ethan couldn't change, but now she wasn't so sure. And that uncertainty left her feeling vulnerable in a way she hadn't anticipated. That night, as they sat across from each other in the penthouse's quiet living room, the silence between them was different, less tense, more reflective. Finally, Sophia broke the silence. "Why now, Ethan? Why start questioning things after all this time?" Ethan leaned back in his chair, his gaze fixed on the city lights beyond the window. "Because I'm tired, Sophia. Tired of feeling like none of it means anything. For years I've been chasing success, power, control. But it's never enough. And meeting you, seeing how much you care about what you do, it made me realize how empty my life is." Sophia's heart softened at his words, but she forced herself to remain guarded. "Words are easy, Ethan. Change is harder." I know, he said, his voice steady, but I'm willing to do the work. Whether you believe me or not, I'm going to try. Sophia didn't respond immediately. Instead, she studied him, searching for any sign of deception. But for the first time, she saw something in Ethan that felt genuine. And while she wasn't ready to trust him yet, she couldn't deny that he was starting to surprise her. As the night wore on, both of them found themselves grappling with a shared uncertainty. Ethan was beginning to see the cracks in his carefully constructed world, and Sophia was starting to question whether she had underestimated him. Neither of them knew where this journey would lead, but one thing was becoming clear. The bet had become something far more meaningful than either of them had anticipated. Sophia stood on the rooftop terrace of the penthouse, the cool night air brushing against her face, the city lights stretched out before her, a glittering reminder of the life she had stepped into. A world of wealth and power that felt alien, even after weeks of living in it. Ethan had joined her at several community events now, and each time, he had shown a side of himself she hadn't expected. But she couldn't ignore the nagging doubt in her heart. People didn't change overnight, and she wasn't about to let her guard down just yet. Inside, Ethan paced the living room, replaying their recent conversations in his mind. He had started this marriage as a game, a challenge to prove his superiority. But now the stakes had changed. Sophia wasn't just a woman he needed to win over. She had become a mirror forcing him to confront the emptiness in his life. He wanted to change, not for the bet, not for his pride, but because he was beginning to see the person he could become. The next morning, Sophia was surprised when Ethan offered to accompany her to a planning meeting for the housing rights campaign. Normally, she would have declined, but something in his tone stopped her. Why? She asked, crossing her arms as she studied him. Because I want to understand, Ethan said simply, and because I know I still have a lot to prove. Sophia hesitated but eventually nodded. Fine, but don't expect me to go easy on you. The meeting was held in a small community center in a neighborhood Ethan had rarely ventured into. The modest space was a stark contrast to his world of marble floors and designer furniture. Yet as he sat among the organizers, listening to their stories and ideas, he felt something stir within him, a sense of connection he hadn't experienced in years. During the meeting, Sophia spoke passionately about the campaign's goals, her voice steady and resolute. Ethan couldn't help but admire her determination. She wasn't just fighting for a cause, she was fighting for people. For lives that had been overlooked and undervalued. It was a kind of purpose Ethan had never known, and he found himself wanting to be a part of it. After the meeting, as they walked back to the car, Sophia glanced at Ethan. You were quiet in there, she said. Not like you, Ethan shrugged. I didn't feel like I had anything worth adding. It was better to listen. Sophia raised an eyebrow, surprised by his humility. Maybe you're finally learning something. Ethan chuckled softly, but there was no arrogance in his tone. Maybe I am. Over the next few days, Ethan threw himself into the campaign, taking on tasks he never would have considered before. He helped with logistics, organized meetings, and even used his business connections to secure additional funding. His efforts didn't go unnoticed by Sophia, though she remained cautious. While she appreciated his help, she couldn't ignore the voice in her head, reminding her to be wary. It was during one of their late-night planning sessions that Sophia decided to confront Ethan about his sudden shift in behavior. They were sitting at the dining table, papers and notes spread out before them when she finally spoke. Why are you really doing this? She asked, her tone direct. Ethan looked up, his expression thoughtful. Because I want to be better, he said. For most of my life, I thought success was about winning, about being on top. But the more time I spend with you, the more I realize how hollow that is. You've shown me what it means to actually care about something, and I want to try. Sophia studied him for a moment, searching for any sign of insincerity. But his eyes were steady, his voice unwavering. For the first time, she allowed herself to consider the possibility that he might be telling the truth. You've got a long way to go, she said finally, her voice softer than before. But maybe you're starting to figure it out, Ethan nodded, a small smile playing on his lips. One step at a time, right? As the night wore on, the atmosphere between them shifted. The tension that had defined their relationship from the start began to ease, replaced by something quieter, more genuine. For the first time, they weren't adversaries, they were partners working toward a common goal. But even as progress was made, Sophia couldn't ignore the lingering doubts in her mind. Ethan was changing, yes, but was it enough? And more importantly, could she trust him to keep changing once the bet was over? As she lay in bed that night, staring at the ceiling, Sophia realized she didn't have the answers. All she could do was wait and see. For now, the walls between them were starting to come down, but the path ahead remained uncertain. Both of them were beginning to change, but whether that change would lead them together or apart was a question neither could answer. The campaign's success brought a newfound energy to both Sophia and Ethan's dynamic, but it also set the stage for the greatest challenge as the project gained momentum. Sophia found herself busier than ever, balancing meetings, public events, and the daily demands of her advocacy work. Ethan, too, was stepping into unfamiliar territory, spending his days immersed in the world Sophia had dedicated her life to. The transformation in him was evident, but it was also fragile. A work in progress that could easily unravel under pressure. One evening, as they sat in the penthouse, reviewing plans for an upcoming fundraiser, a call came that shifted the course of their fragile partnership. It was from one of Ethan's board members, a man named Charles, who had caught wind of Ethan's involvement in Sophia's campaign. The tone of the conversation was sharp, accusatory, and dismissive. "You're jeopardizing the company's image," Charles barked over the phone. "Do you have any idea how this looks? You're associating with causes that could alienate our high-profile clients." Ethan clenched his jaw, his free hand gripping the edge of the desk. "This has nothing to do with the company," he replied, his voice measured but firm. "It's personal. It's reckless," Charles snapped. "Fix this, Ethan, or the board will." When the call ended, Ethan sat in silence, his mind racing. His involvement in Sophia's world had already begun to draw scrutiny, and the stakes were higher than he had anticipated. He knew the board's concerns weren't empty threats. They had the power to undermine everything he had built. Sophia noticed the tension as Ethan rejoined her at the table. "Everything okay?" she asked cautiously. Ethan hesitated before answering. "It's the board. They're not happy about my involvement in the campaign." Sophia folded her arms, her expression unreadable. "And what are you going to do about it?" "I'm not stepping away," Ethan said firmly. "This matters, and I'm not going to let them dictate my choices." Sophia's gaze softened, but only slightly. "It's easy to say that now. What happens when they put real pressure on you?" Ethan met her eyes, the determination in his voice unwavering. "Then I'll deal with it. I've spent my entire life putting the company first. Maybe it's time I stop." Sophia wanted to believe him, but her trust was hard-earned. "We'll see," she said quietly, turning back to the papers on the table. In the days that followed, the tension grew. Ethan's defiance of the board's warnings only fueled their discontent, and whispers of an internal revolt began to circulate. Charles, emboldened by support from other members, demanded a formal meeting to discuss Ethan's actions. The pressure mounted, and Ethan found himself at a crossroads. Protect his legacy, or stand by his newfound principles. Sophia, meanwhile, remained distant, watching as Ethan struggled to navigate the storm. She admired his resolve, but she couldn't ignore the nagging doubt that lingered in her mind. Was this change truly permanent, or would he revert to his old ways under pressure? The breaking point came during the board meeting. Ethan stood before the room, his usual confidence tempered by the weight of the moment. Charles wasted no time launching into his attack, citing risk to the company's reputation and financial stability. Other members chimed in, their voices echoing with disapproval. Ethan listened in silence, his expression unreadable. When the room finally quieted, he spoke, his voice calm but resolute. "I've made a lot of decisions in my life that I'm not proud of. I've prioritized profit over people, control over compassion, and for a long time I thought that was the only way to succeed. But I was wrong." The room shifted, murmurs breaking out among the board members. Charles narrowed his eyes. "This isn't about morality, Ethan. It's about business." "No," Ethan said firmly. "It's about both. And if doing the right thing means risking my position here, so be it. I won't back down." The meeting ended in a tense stalemate, with the board agreeing to postpone any decisions. Ethan returned to the penthouse that evening, emotionally drained, but resolute in his choice. Sophia was waiting for him, her expression unreadable. "So how'd it go?" she asked. "I stood my ground," Ethan replied, sinking into a chair. They weren't happy, but I don't care. This matters more than the company. For the first time, Sophia saw something in Ethan that felt real, genuine conviction, untainted by ego or manipulation. She nodded, a small smile playing on her lips. Maybe you're finally starting to figure it out. Ethan looked at her, his eyes filled with a mix of exhaustion and gratitude. I hope so, because this is the first time in my life that I feel like I'm fighting for something that actually matters. As the night wore on, the weight of the day began to lift. For the first time, Ethan and Sophia found themselves on the same side, united by a shared purpose. But the challenges ahead were far from over. The cracks in Ethan's world had grown wider, and the stakes had never been higher. Whether he could withstand the pressure and prove himself to Sophia and to himself remained to be seen. The tension between Ethan and the board reached its peak as whispers of a potential vote to remove him as CEO began circulating. Ethan, however, refused to back down. For the first time in his life, he felt that he was standing for something real, something worth fighting for. Sophia watched his struggle from a distance, torn between admiration and caution. She could see the weight of his decisions taking a toll, but she wasn't sure if his newfound convictions would last under the mounting pressure. Ethan's breaking point came during a tense evening at the penthouse. He had just returned from another grueling board meeting, his tie loosened, his shoulders tense. Sophia was seated at the dining table, reviewing plans for the upcoming fundraiser. She glanced up as he entered, immediately sensing his frustration. They're pushing harder, Ethan said, sinking into a chair across from her. Charles is rallying the board against me. They're threatening to bring in someone new if I don't step away from the campaign. Sophia's expression remained calm, but her voice was firm. So what are you going to do? Ethan leaned forward, his hands clasped together. I'm not stepping away. This isn't just about the campaign. It's about proving that I can be more than what I was. But I'd be lying if I said it wasn't terrifying. Sophia softened, seeing the vulnerability in his eyes. Change isn't easy, Ethan. But if it were, it wouldn't be worth it. Her words stayed with him that night as he sat alone in the penthouse's vast living room. The weight of his decisions felt heavier than ever. But amidst the uncertainty, there was a flicker of clarity. For years he had been defined by his ambition, his need for control. But now he realized that real strength came from letting go, from risking everything for the chance to do something meaningful. The following day, Ethan made his decision. At a hastily called board meeting, he stood before the room, his posture straight, his voice steady. I understand the concerns you all have, he began, meeting each member's gaze. But I've come to realize that running this company isn't just about profits or reputation. It's about integrity. If that means risking my position, then so be it. I won't abandon something I believe in. The room fell silent. Even Charles, who had been Ethan's most vocal critic, seemed momentarily taken aback by his resolve. The meeting ended without a vote, leaving Ethan uncertain of what the future held. But for the first time he felt at peace with his choices. Back at the penthouse, Ethan found Sophia waiting for him. She looked up as he entered, her expression unreadable. How did it go? She asked. They didn't vote, Ethan said, his voice quiet. But I made it clear where I stand. Sophia studied him for a moment before nodding. And how do you feel about that? Ethan exhaled, running a hand through his hair. Scared but also free. Sophia smiled faintly, her eyes softening. Maybe you're finally starting to understand what matters. The days that followed brought a surprising turn of events. The fundraiser, which had been a point of contention for Ethan and Sophia, became a resounding success. People from all walks of life came together, their shared purpose overshadowing any differences. Ethan, who had always thrived on control, found himself stepping back, letting Sophia lead. And for the first time he realized how much he still had to learn. At the end of the evening, as the last guests trickled out, Sophia and Ethan stood together in the quiet venue. The air between them was lighter, the tension that had defined their relationship giving way to something more. You did good today, Sophia said, her voice soft but sincere. Ethan looked at her, a small smile playing on his lips. We did good, Sophia nodded, her heart warming at his words. For the first time she saw a glimpse of the man he could become. A man who wasn't just fighting for himself, but for something greater. But as the night wore on, Sophia couldn't shake the feeling that the hardest part was still to come. Ethan's transformation was real, but fragile, and the road ahead would test both of them in ways they couldn't yet foresee. For now, though, they allowed themselves a moment of quiet victory, knowing that the fight was far from over. The climactic confrontation came sooner than either Ethan or Sophia expected. The tension between Ethan and the board had reached a breaking point, and Charles called for an emergency meeting, determined to force Ethan's hand. Word of the meeting spread quickly, and the media latched onto the story, painting Ethan as a reckless CEO jeopardizing his company for personal causes. The morning of the meeting, Sophia found Ethan sitting in the living room, staring out at the city skyline. His usual calm demeanor was gone, replaced by a quiet tension that made the air feel heavy. "They're going to vote today," Ethan said, his voice low. "Charles has the numbers. They'll force me out." Sophia sat down across from him, her expression serious but calm. "And what will you do?" Ethan hesitated, the weight of the decision pressing down on him. "I don't know. I fought so hard to build this company, but maybe it's time to let it go." Sophia studied him, her gaze steady. Letting go doesn't mean losing. Sometimes it's the only way to move forward. Her words resonated with Ethan in a way he hadn't expected. He nodded slowly, his resolve hardening. "You're right. I've been holding on because I was afraid of what it would mean to lose. But maybe losing isn't the worst thing." At the board meeting, Ethan walked in with his head held high, ready to face whatever came next. Charles wasted no time laying out his case, citing Ethan's recent actions as a liability to the company's future. The other members murmured in agreement, their eyes avoiding Ethan's. When it was Ethan's turn to speak, he stood, his voice steady despite the tension in the room. "I won't deny that I've made mistakes," Ethan began, meeting the gaze of each board member in turn. "For years I ran this company with one goal, winning. But winning at any cost comes with consequences. And I've come to realize that success without integrity is empty." The room fell silent as Ethan continued. "I won't apologize for standing up for something I believe in. If that means stepping down, then so be it. But know this, you're not just voting on a CEO today, you're voting on what kind of company you want this to be, a company that prioritizes people or one that's driven solely by profit." The board members exchanged uneasy glances. Charles, who had been smirking moments earlier, now looked less certain. After a tense silence, the vote was called. As expected, the decision was split, but Charles had secured enough support to remove Ethan from his position. Ethan left the meeting with his head held high, the weight of the decision, both liberating and bittersweet. He returned to the penthouse that evening, unsure of how to tell Sophia the outcome. But when he walked in, she was already waiting for him, her expression unreadable. "Well," she asked. "They voted me out," Ethan said simply. Sophia nodded, her gaze steady. "And how do you feel?" Ethan took a deep breath. "Lighter, it hurts, but I think I made the right choice." Sophia's lips curved into a faint smile. "You did. And I'm proud of you for it." Ethan looked at her, the sincerity in her voice, filling him with a sense of gratitude he hadn't felt in years. For the first time, he felt like he had earned her respect, not through wealth or power but through integrity. The weeks that followed were a whirlwind of change. Ethan began divesting from some of his most controversial investments, redirecting his resources toward causes he now believed in. He stayed involved in Sophia's campaign, not as a benefactor, but as a partner, learning from her and supporting her vision. Sophia too found herself changing. She had started this marriage with a plan to expose Ethan's flaws and use the experience to further her goals. But as she watched him grow, she realized she had underestimated him. His transformation was real, and it had forced her to confront her own biases and fears. One evening, as they sat together on the balcony, the city lights twinkling below, Ethan turned to Sophia with a quiet intensity in his eyes. "Thank you," he said, "for challenging me, for not letting me stay the man I was." Sophia smiled, her heart softening. "You did the work, Ethan. I just showed you what was possible." They sat in silence for a moment, the weight of their journey settling between them. They had started as adversaries, bound by a bet that seemed destined for failure. But now, as they looked out at the city, they realized how far they had come. "What happens now?" Ethan asked, his voice filled with a mix of hope and uncertainty. Sophia turned to him, her expression thoughtful. "Now we see where this goes. Together." For the first time, Ethan felt a sense of peace, Not because he had won, but because he had learned what it truly meant to grow. The bet was over, but their story was just beginning. Together they were ready to face whatever came next, one step at a time. The days following Ethan's resignation marked a turning point, not just in his life, but in his relationship with Sophia. The penthouse, once a symbol of wealth and status, now felt quieter, more reflective. Ethan spent his mornings going over plans for community projects and evenings discussing ideas with Sophia. Their conversations, once filled with tension and mistrust, were now open and honest. For the first time, they weren't just two people bound by a contract, they were partners. Sophia found herself observing the changes in Ethan with a mix of admiration and caution. He had let go of his position as CEO, a move she hadn't thought him capable of when they first met. But what struck her most was his newfound humility. Ethan no longer acted as if the world revolved around him. Instead, he approached each day with a quiet determination to rebuild his life on a foundation of integrity and purpose. One afternoon, as they walked through a community garden that Sophia had helped establish, she noticed Ethan pause to speak with a young boy planting flowers with his mother. Ethan crouched down, asking the boy about the plants, his tone warm and genuine. Sophia watched from a distance, a small smile playing on her lips. This was a side of Ethan she hadn't seen before. A man who cared, not because it benefited him but because it was the right thing to do. Later that evening, as they sat on the balcony, Ethan turned to Sophia, a thoughtful expression on his face. He began, I used to think success was about climbing higher no matter what it cost. But now I think it's about how many people you can bring with you. Sophia nodded, her gaze fixed on the city lights. You've come a long way, Ethan. But real change takes time. It's not about one big gesture. It's about consistency. Ethan leaned back in his chair, a small smile playing on his lips. I guess I have a good teacher. Sophia rolled her eyes, but there was warmth in her voice as she replied. Don't get used to the compliments. I'm still watching you. Their banter was light, but the underlying truth was clear. They had come to respect each other in ways neither had expected. The walls that had once divided them were crumbling, replaced by a growing sense of trust. As the weeks turned into months, Ethan and Sophia worked side by side on various initiatives, blending their strengths to make a tangible impact. Ethan's business acumen brought structure and resources to Sophia's causes, while her passion and vision reminded him of the importance of humanity in every decision. One evening, as they prepared dinner together, a new ritual they had adopted, Sophia set down her knife and turned to Ethan, her expression serious. Why did you fight so hard for this? She asked. Even when the board turned against you, even when it would have been easier to walk away, why did you stay? Ethan paused, considering her question. Because you showed me something I didn't know I was missing. You showed me what it means to believe in something bigger than yourself. I wanted to be a part of that, and I wanted to be someone you could respect. Sophia's heart softened at his words, but she forced herself to stay grounded. Respect isn't given, Ethan. It's earned. I know, he said, his voice steady, and I'll spend the rest of my life trying to earn it. As they finished dinner, Sophia found herself feeling something she hadn't allowed herself to feel in years. Hope. She had entered this marriage with a plan, certain that Ethan was a man who couldn't change. But now she saw a man who was trying not because he had to, but because he wanted to. And that made all the difference. In the quiet of the evening, as they sat together on the couch, Sophia leaned her head against Ethan's shoulder. A small gesture, but one that spoke volumes. They had come a long way, and while the road ahead was still uncertain, they were ready to face it together. For Sophia it was a step toward trust. For Ethan it was a step toward redemption. And for both of them it was the beginning of a new chapter. One built not on bets or games, but on the promise of something real. As the 6th month of their marriage approached its end, the atmosphere in the penthouse shifted from tension to something deeper, almost reverent. The journey that had begun as a bet had evolved into something neither Sophia nor Ethan could have anticipated. The walls between them had crumbled, and what remained was a connection forged through struggle, respect, and the slow, deliberate process of trust. Ethan found himself reflecting on how much had changed. The man who had entered into this marriage as a game, driven by ego and the desire to win, was gone. In his place was someone new, someone who valued purpose over power and connection over control. But he knew his transformation was still a work in progress, and Sophia's trust was something he would need to earn every day. One evening, as they sat on the balcony overlooking the city, Ethan turned to Sophia, his expression thoughtful. "When this started, I thought it would be simple," he said quietly. "But you've shown me that the best things in life aren't easy. They take time, effort, and a willingness to change." Sophia met his gaze, her eyes soft but guarded. "And do you think you've changed, Ethan?" "I think I'm still changing," he admitted. "And I know I have a long way to go. But for the first time I feel like I'm on the right path." Sophia nodded, her heart warming at his sincerity. "You've come a long way, but trust isn't built overnight. It's something you'll have to keep proving." "I will," Ethan said firmly. "Every day if that's what it takes." The next morning Ethan surprised Sophia by preparing breakfast, a modest but heartfelt gesture that spoke to his desire to show her how much he valued her. As they sat together at the dining table, Sophia couldn't help but smile at the sight of him, so out of his element, yet so determined. "You know," she said, taking a sip of her coffee, "I didn't expect this when we started. I thought you'd stick to your old ways, that this was just another game for you. And I thought I could win you over with money and charm," Ethan replied with a wry smile. "Turns out I had to dig a little deeper." Sophia laughed softly, shaking her head. "You had to become a real person." They fell into a comfortable silence, the kind that spoke of a shared understanding. For the first time they felt like equals, not adversaries, not strangers bound by circumstance, but two people who had chosen to grow together. As the final day of their 6-month agreement approached, Ethan knew he needed to address the inevitable. That evening he took Sophia to the rooftop terrace, a place that had become their shared sanctuary. The city lights sparkled below, a fitting backdrop for the conversation they were about to have. "I know our agreement is almost over," Ethan began, his voice steady but tinged with emotion. "And I know this started as a bet, a selfish, thoughtless game, but it's become so much more than that. You've shown me what it means to care about something real, and I don't want this to end." Sophia studied him, her expression unreadable. "And what are you asking, Ethan?" "I'm asking for a real chance," he said, "not because of the bet, but because I've fallen in love with you. I want to build something with you, something honest, something lasting." Sophia's heart swelled at his words, but she didn't answer immediately. Instead, she turned her gaze to the skyline, her thoughts racing. She had seen Ethan's growth, his determination to change, but trust was still fragile. Was she ready to take that leap? After a long pause, she turned back to him, her voice soft but resolute. "If we do this, it has to be on equal terms. No games, no power plays, just us figuring it out together." Ethan nodded, his eyes bright with hope. "That's all I want." Sophia smiled, a warmth spreading through her chest. "Then let's see where this goes." The months that followed were a testament to their newfound partnership. They continued working together on community projects, blending Ethan's strategic mind with Sophia's passion and vision. Their relationship, once defined by conflict, grew into something grounded in mutual respect and genuine affection. One evening, as they prepared dinner in the kitchen, a routine that had become a cherished ritual, Sophia turned to Ethan with a soft smile. "Who would have thought," she said, her tone teasing, "that this would be the outcome of a bet?" Ethan laughed, pulling her into a gentle embrace. "The best bet I ever made." Their story, once marked by skepticism and struggle, had transformed into something beautiful, a journey of growth, redemption, and the discovery of what truly mattered. As they stood together, the future stretched before them, full of possibility. What do you think? Did Sophia make the right choice in giving Ethan a second chance? Share your thoughts in the comments, and don't forget to subscribe to the channel for more stories like this. Thank you for watching.